Welcome to Living from the Soul. This is your host, Sam Tarode. One of my favorite writers, Elbert Hubbard, said that the problem with theologians is you have to die to find out whether they're right. Well, today, for the first time in human history, we have thousands of accounts from people who have died and come back to tell the tale. This is due to advances in medicine and resuscitation, as well as advances in communications, which allow near-death experiencers to share their stories around the world. Near-death experiences are nothing new. One is described in the works of Plato. But we no longer have to rely on centuries-old books containing second- and third-hand accounts, or mere guesses, about what happens after death. I've come to believe that, taken as a whole, not considering any one person's story as authoritative, near-death experiences give us the most trustworthy answers to the great questions that have occupied philosophers, theologians, and ordinary people for millennia. So what are those answers? Here's a summary from my guest today, P.M.H. Atwater.
What we can learn from near-death experiences. Death does not end life. Only the scenery changes at death. Many see departed loved ones, pets, birds, angels. Light can predominate, white bright, dark black, or a power beyond light that is impossible to describe. We are all more capable, smarter than we think we are. Mind is endless. Only thoughts limit. Everyone is psychic, creative, inventive, loved. Life is worth its living. There is a central source of existence. Some call this God, Allah, or hundreds of other names for deity. All healing is based on the willingness to change. So is forgiveness. Prayer is real and it works. Children see prayer as a bright or rainbow-banded light that passes from sender to receiver. Love is the only standard that exists. Choice is the only process.
P.M.H. Atwater is one of the world's leading experts on near-death experiences, or NDEs. After having 3 near-death experiences of her own in 1977, when there was very little public knowledge about them, P.M.H. began researching other people's experiences, using investigative techniques she learned from her adoptive father, who was a police officer. She has now investigated and analyzed over 4,000 NDEs and is the author of 18 books about them. She's been featured in Newsweek magazine and interviewed by television hosts including Regis and Kathie Lee, Larry King, and Sally Jessy Raphael. Before talking with P.M.H., I'd read 5 of her books, and after we finished our conversation, I ordered 2 more. For the best overview of her work, I'll recommend Dying to Know You, Proof of God in the Near-Death Experience. It's a short and powerful book. And now I hope you'll enjoy this conversation with P.M.H. Atwater. We had a lot of technical difficulties earlier. It was quite an adventure, but things appear to be straightened out.
I've never had anything like this happen.
Well, that's one thing you found is people who've had a near-death experience tend to have a lot of malfunctioning electronics around them.
Yes.
Well, I've got a number of your books in front of me, and including the big book of near-death experiences. This is a massive book. I also recently read Dying to Know You.
Yes.
Proof of God in the Near-Death Experience. And that's a fantastic little book and a great introduction to your work because it's a pretty thin, easy read.
Yeah.
Is that your most recent book, or have you done more since Dying to Know You?
The most recent is The Forever Angels.
About children.
Yeah, from 0, in other words, birth until 5 years of age.
Yeah, well, I've gotten fascinated with near-death experiences over the past few years. I was always aware of them. Someone might come on daytime TV talking about their near-death experience. I know you've been interviewed on several of those shows, but it never really made an impact on me. I thought, oh, that's an interesting story, but it's just one person's anecdote. What you've done, besides your own near-death experience, you've analyzed over 4,000 experiences from people around the world. What number are you up to now?
Nearly 5,000.
Yeah. Wow.
Adults and children. Yes.
So from that, it's not just one person's story or a story here and there. You can analyze these established patterns. And it seems to me a reliable source of truth when you have that many people who've had this experience.
And often I would get in with their families. If they were married, talk to their spouse. Sometimes I talk to their health caregivers. So I would always want other people's point of view, not just their point of view. And remember, I'm a cop's kid. I'm raised in a police station. And Dad always said, the body says more than the mouth does. So you're watching the body. What are they doing with their shoulders? How are they walking? What are they like when they're talking? So I really look at that too as well.
Wow. I don't want to make you repeat too much, a story you've told so many times, but could you give just a brief overview of your own near-death experiences?
Oh, you're kidding.
If you could make it very brief.
I had three. 3 in 3 months. I look back at it and I call it the heavenly sledgehammer effect. This is in 1977, January 2, January 4, and again, March 29. 1977 wasn't my year. I just got ripped to pieces. Yeah, so, but what were they like? Well, I was raped. I became pregnant and miscarried. So all of what happened to me came from the miscarriage. And the first one was relatively simple. I was leaving my body. I was in the bathroom at the time, and I was leaving my body. I passed the sack and kept bumping into the light bulb on the ceiling. And I couldn't understand why I was bumping into the light bulb. And I would look down, and there was my body and all this blood. And I tend to be a kind of a neat Nick. That's not mine. Can't be mine. No way, that's not mine. And finally, all of my thoughts began to form all these crazy little funny looking blobs in the air, sort of like ink blots, only blobs. And I didn't like that. And after a while, I looked at that body and screamed. And it was that scream that brought me back into my body. And I re-entered my body. You have to become smaller to fit into your body, because when you're out of your body, you're larger.
Wow.
So I had to shrink to come back in, sort of like you're pulling a rubber band and then you let go of it. Bing! That's kind of what re-entry was like, at least for me. And I did not go to a doctor. I did not know what was going on. A good Western woman, so you can take care of yourself. Thank you. You don't go around knocking on doors asking for help. You take care of yourself. So I had all these pillows. I just lay there, kind of in a stupor, for about a day and a half. And finally, my oldest daughter, my son was gone, but the 2 daughters were still there, came to me and jiggled me and said, "Should I call into work and let them know that you're late if you're not feeling well?" And I said, yes. And she left. By then it was Monday morning, and it occurred to me that I need some help, maybe. And I tried to get out of bed. I could not walk. So I crawled all the way from the bedrooms to the living room, into the dining room. The only phone in the house was a wall phone in the kitchen. And I got within maybe 3 or 4 feet of the phone. And I couldn't go any further. And that was it. And that's when I had my second near-death experience and left my body. And all kinds of things occurred and happened. How can I even talk about it? It's written down in several of my little books, but how can you talk about things like that? It was as if I was a creator. And I wanted to play with that and see if I could, in some way, take all of these thought forms and control them and make something with them. And I did. I wanted to make a house, and I did. And I walked all over it and knocked on things, as near as I could tell it was real. And then I wanted to see if I could make something animate. And I wanted to make a huge oak tree. And I did, complete with little wormholes and all kinds of little things. And then I just went cuckoo nuts. And I started creating all kinds of things. And then after I was done, there was this feeling and this sense that it was time to let it all go. So I did. I prayed it all away and it was gone. And it was just me all by myself in this incredible blackness. And that's when I had my past life review. And in my case, it was not just reviewing all of your deeds that you had ever done, but reviewed the total impact of my ever having existed on the earth plane. That impact on the soil, on the ground, on the trees, on the bushes, on the air, on the water, the people, everything, the total gestalt of me having ever existed. And that was overwhelming. I considered that hellish because nobody ever told me that every thought you think goes out and has a life of its own. I didn't know that how I felt would emanate out to affect others as I walked by, to affect the earth as I walked upon it, the air. I didn't know the power a human being has. I just had no concept. And then I found loved ones who had died and gone on before, including a grandfather I had never had occasion to meet. There was no way I could have ever met him. He came forward and introduced himself. I was able to visit and know this man and see in him some of my own characteristics. I thought, well, that's where that came from. And then I met Jesus. Jesus came and we laughed together. It wasn't this nonsense of having to bow before Jesus. Jesus is your elder brother. All of us. I don't care if you believe in it or not, Jesus is still our elder brother. To be able to hug him and laugh with him and know how precious and how wonderful, what he showed us in his life, the way he lived his life, what he showed us about living. And I considered that to just be so precious, so wonderful, so, great. And I was able to thank him for the model he gave to all of us in how we could live and what life's all about. And then everything disappeared. Everything left. It was just me in that darkness. And suddenly there was all kinds of lights, glittery lights, like 4th of July lights. And I flowed back into my body on these, sort of like a rug of these lights. But it was all so overwhelming that I could not accept who I was, where I was, or what I had ever been.
Yeah.
So instead of going that remaining 3 feet to go to the phone to ask for help, I crawled all the way back to my bed and went to sleep. And it was my children who found me. And sort of like the rest is history. I went to a specialist. He could not figure out why I was alive. He said, "You should be dead." I said, "Well, I'm here." So I went home and did the best I could with trying to be a human being again. And my third near-death experience happened March 29. And the man who raped me came back in my life, insulted me, and said this was all my imagination. It was nonsense, and slammed the door in my face. And I just erupted into tears, and I could not understand his response, why he ever came back, why he said what he said, all these whys. So I just died. I died again. I died the third time. I just fell into a chair and I was gone. And, went through the roof and seeing all the levels of the construction and out into the night sky. It was night. I didn't want to come back. I mean, that's it. I don't understand the earth plane. I don't understand people. this doesn't make any sense at all. Goodbye, Earth. So I went way out into the night sky. And there was a lip of light. And as I got closer to it, the lip opened enough for me to go in. And I absolutely knew I was at the point of creation itself. This is where it all begins. This is what it all is about. And I was headed for the middle of that hourglass shape I called cyclones. And I was going right for the middle of it because I knew that's where I could have full contact with God. And as I did, my son, who just returned from a cruise school, and he was at the Black Angus bar in Boise, Idaho, great big guy, and he's tossing some with friends. And he suddenly put the beer down. I didn't know this till a year later when he told me, but he said he put the beer down. He said, my mother needs me. I mean, he just knew my mother needs me. I have to go home and help my mother. So I jumped in the car, went home, found me on the floor. And he did what we had trained all of our children to do. You go first within. You check within. All of your information, all of your do's and don'ts, what is real is within. So instead of calling a phone for help, he went within. There was a voice in there that said, talk. It doesn't matter what you say, just keep talking to your mother. And I heard him. Just at that moment when I was just long gone, never to come back, I heard my son's voice, and I heard something on his voice that I did not think human beings were capable of, and that's unconditional love. I knew you could find it on the other side, but not this time. And his voice was proof to me that there really is unconditional love. So I came back riding on his voice.
Wow.
And I could not speak when I came back. All I could do was cry. So he hugged me and he put me to bed. And the next morning I did something very, very daring for me. And that is I took myself out of allopathic care and went totally to naturopathic care, the natural way of dealing with this kind of problem. And among the things I had to do, I had to relearn how to stand, how to crawl, how to sit, how to tell the difference between left and right, how to see properly, hear properly, and rebuild all my belief systems. I mean, everything was gone. And for a while, the only logical words I could say was, God is. And I'd chant it. I would chant it. It's what kept me alive. Left out in here is the extra thing that happened in my third near-death experience. Just before I heard Kelly, my son, just before I heard him, I heard this voice. I call it the voice like none other, because it wasn't like an angel. It wasn't like a guardian. It wasn't like any of those voices. Very, very different. That's why I called it the voice like none other. And it said, test revelation. You are to do the research. Then it showed me what that meant. It did not name book number 1. It did name books 2 and 3. Book 2 is Future Memory. It is not a book. It is a labyrinth. I used every word, every sentence, every page, the mathematics of that to construct the labyrinth. It's a real labyrinth. So when you're reading it, when you're through, it helps to lift your consciousness up to the next highest level possible for you at that time.
I haven't read that one, so I'll have to get a hold of that.
That's the labyrinth. The other one was a manual for developing humans. I didn't name these. The voice, like none other, named them. And it's really a manual. It starts with how to think, how to talk. For all experiencers, when you come back, the first thing you have to learn is how to think and how to talk. Because you've been somewhere else in an area or a world or a vibration you cannot describe. I don't care how many times you try. And it will change your way of thinking and your way of living. So please, first thing you do, relearn how to think and how to talk. Well, this is what the manual does. It begins there. How many of us are taught, like in first grade, second grade, how to be a human? I mean, we are all co-creators with the Creator. Are we taught that in school? Do our parents teach that? Nope.
Not in church either.
So that's what the book is for, to teach you what you are, to help you be a co-creator with the Creator.
Well, I've read about 5 of your books. Now I have to go back and get these other 2.
Well, I've written 18. I thought I had finished my 19th, which is supposedly a memoir. I come to find out, I have no idea what a memoir is. I'm a researcher. How do you write a memoir, for heaven's sake? So I'm struggling with that one. But I am doing 2 other forms of research now. Get on my website and find out about them. I do publish a free monthly newsletter. Anybody who's interested, I call it For the Curious. So if you're not curious, you won't like it. But if you are curious, you'll love it.
Memoirs are very tough to write. It's something I've thought about. A lot of the details of my life just bore me, and I wouldn't want to write about them.
Yeah,
Well,
I was born in the reclaimed deserts of southern Idaho, and I wound up being raised by Norwegians. I mean, go figure. Yeah, I always had a very different life.
You mentioned that in your 3rd near-death experience, you were shown 3 books that you were to write.
The first one was not named. I rather think that was Coming Back to Life, my first book, but I don't know for sure. The second book was Future Memory. The third one was a manual for developing humans. Beyond the Light came later on, along with a lot of other books after that. And my latest one, it's called The Forever Angels, and it's about those children who had their near-death experience between birth and the age of 5. They are not like any other near-death experiencer. These are the children who have no before. So there's no way they can compare anything. So they come into life still where they are in that river of consciousness. They come in with that innocence, that glory, that intelligence, that knowingness. They know more than their parents do. They stand out in the family. Brothers and sisters think they're from Mars. They know that more than their teachers do. They're often bullied because of that. Some of them have an easy time through life. Most of them have a rough time through life. These people have a more difficult time than others in being a part of the earth plane. And what I can give as an antidote to that is visualization techniques. If you teach your child visualization techniques, they can go back there. They can stay there for 5-10 minutes or whatever they want, and then come back here, help them to understand that here in the body is where they will be able to make the most difference. This is where they're needed. So they can go back there to get help or sustenance or feel good, and then come back to their families here and live their life out here. So when we're looking at near-death experiences, all of a sudden we're confronted with religion. We're confronted with things like psychism, the intuitive, the psychic. We're confronted with history. We're confronted with what drives us as a human being. How do we grow? What is life? Where are we going in life? What is religion? What is spirituality? And truly, I feel that this idea of the religious versus the spiritual, in essence, they're both the same. Mm-hmm. But if you want to take the doctrine out, those men, and they were men, who decided this is a testimonial, this is where you live, this is what you do, this is what life is. If you take all of that out and just look at this idea of religion, it's a good idea. There's nothing wrong with religion. What trips us is the doctrine of religion.
Uh-huh.
If you're going to stick with religion, and that's fine, then know what you're talking about and know about your Bible. I mean, the Bible has wonderful things in it. I would never put it down. I use the Bible. However, I use the Lamsa Bible because Lamsa was a child in the Sinai area. He spoke and learned Peshitta. The Bible comes from the Peshitta. He had a vision when he was like a teenager or something like that. It was his job to translate the Bible directly from the Peshitta. And it's the only translation ever made that's direct from the Peshitta to the English. So if you want a Bible that makes sense, that is more in tune with the actual times, then you want the Lamsa Bible.
Interesting. For centuries, people have argued about the meaning of Greek words and Hebrew words and Aramaic and what Jesus meant to know what happens after death, what happens beyond this world. But now we have thousands of people who've actually experienced death and have come back to tell us what it's like. So that's what's fascinating to me.
Well, they come back more spiritual. I'm not saying they all leave the Bible or biblical kind of church. About a third of them stay, but about 2/3 of them leave the regular church facility and church way of looking at things. Those that stay, they do everything they can to infuse the church with a new vision and excite the church with a new vision. And many of them become missionaries or ministers themselves, even start their own religion. But 2/3 leave. Now, I've noticed with that 2/3 that leave, about maybe 15 years later, 20 years later, most of them come back to a church environment. They either create their own kind of at-home church and get together with others, or they join the metaphysical churches. You know, there's 2 metaphysical churches in the United States today. One of them is Unity. It's often called the Unity Church of Christianity because it's based on Christian principles, but it's strictly metaphysical. And the other one is now called the Centers of Spiritual Living. It used to be called the Science of Mind churches, and it was started by Ernest Holmes. And, and his teachings, what he learned, his way of praying, his way of looking at spirituality, I think is one of the best I've ever come across. Absolutely the best. I was able to take what they call SOM 1, Science of Mind 1, in a Science of Mind church. And what that does is it teaches you how to pray. And they have a 5-step process. And those 5 steps helped me to rethink. And you go to these churches, yes, there's a minister. Yes, they go through training, but it's a more open-ended spiritual kind of training.
Yeah.
Yes, they have prayers. Yes, they have music. But again, it's more open, uplifting way of looking at the world in a very spiritual and loving way.
I've read Ernest Holmes' book on the science of mind. It's an excellent book.
Oh, I love it.
I think he was inspired a lot by Ralph Waldo Emerson, who's my favorite philosopher.
Yeah, he's one of the new thinkers.
Are you involved in one of these churches today?
My husband and I go to Unity.
Okay, great.
We love Science of Mind, but there's no Science of Mind church here where we live, but there is a Unity church. So we do go to every Sunday that we possibly can, not necessarily because we want to be taught, but because we want to share that love with everybody else there.
The community.
It's a community. And you'll find that with near-death experiencers everywhere. They want that sense of being in community with other people that have fallen in love with love.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in the more fire and brimstone tradition, and you've studied 5,000 people who have died and come back. What do they have to say about that?
Most of them are pretty close to what I went through in the sense of how it affected them. Very, very few go the biblical route. Very, very few stay in an Orthodox church. Some of them join meditation groups. Some of them join the Baha'i faith. Some of them choose to just be mystics and do their own thing by themselves. Most of them are very similar to what Terry and I did. My husband's name is Terry. We go to a metaphysical church. Again, there's a period of time where the average near-death experiencer has their church on a rock somewhere, or maybe swimming in the ocean. That's their church. And very real. They become the water, they become the rocks, they become the fish. That sense that that's all part of you. It's true, it is. But later on, as you grow older, there comes a time when you really do want to share the beauty and the love with others, and to find others that are more like you. Being able to do that is just wonderful. I recommend it to anybody.
Would you say that heaven and hell are states of consciousness, and people who have found themselves in a hellish state after death, that's a temporary purification that they go through? It's not a permanent state for the soul.
I'd call it purification. In my research base, 1 out of 7 had a hellish experience. And invariably, I would find these people very troubled in life anyway, had a lot of questions, had a lot of misgivings. I would like to share with you a particular incident that happened to me as a researcher when I was giving a talk at a very large building full of people. And when I was through with my talk, I invited those that were there, anyone who had had a near-death experience and would like to share it with others, please come up to the mic. And there were 2 people who volunteered, one a man and the other a woman. The man was first. I'd guess his age to be maybe early 30s. And he shared this beautiful near-death experience. You talk about a heavenly near-death experience, he had it. And when it was over, he shocked everybody there by saying this is the worst thing that had ever happened to him in his life. He wished it had never happened. It had screwed his life terribly, and he didn't like it.
Wow.
It just shocked everybody. And then this woman, maybe 36, jumped up and shared her experience. And in her experience, she was in this very dark, dark place. And there was this huge storm and winds, and it was very, very dark, almost black, and she had fallen into a whirlpool. And the whirlpool was sucking her down, 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 down. And she was screaming, and the wind was screaming, and she fought and fought and fought. And she was finally able to pull herself out of that water and into the shore. And she was able to save herself. And then she shocked everybody by saying this was the best thing that had ever happened to her in her life, because it showed her that she could overcome anything, that she had all she needed to live a beautiful and wonderful life.
Wow.
So, she had a hellish experience, but she loved it. The guy had a heavenly experience, but he hated it. What this did for me, it taught me in spades that it's the individual's opinion. It's the individual's response to what happened to them, rather than the scenario itself. It's the individual and what they feel about it. I found 4 distinctive types of near-death experiences. The first one I called the initial experience, very, very simple, something like a quick out-of-body experience, or the loving nothingness, or a friendly voice, and that's all there is to it. Children have a lot of these. The second one was the hellish or unpleasant near-death experience. The skeletons or darkness or fear, all of this kind of scary stuff. And I found that invariably these people had really serious unfinished business. There was some kind of unfinished business or fear or something else. And the third one, of course, is the heavenly or pleasant near-death experience. Half of the people have that, about 48%. Then the last one, the transcendent experience, you almost never have a past life review with this one. This one is more transcendent. It's more concerned with what you can do to make a difference in the world or human history. It's a biggie kind of thing where you're called upon to look at the greater reality. And there's a whole pattern of after effects. I can certainly say in general, there is a marked change in thought processing, how the brain functions. There's a marked change in the nervous system, the digestive system, and skin sensitivity. About 60 to 65% of them develop electrical sensitivity. Of course, you can tell everybody what we went through just to have this show. Because that's no joke. Electrical sensitivity can be a monster sometimes. And most of them come back knowing more than they did before. So that certainly is brain enhancement. And we know now that easily 70%, maybe a little higher, of near-death experiencers who return are divorced within about 5 to 7 years afterward. It can cause real problems in families, simply because the average near-death experiencer, when you return, every woman you see is your mother, your sister, your daughter. Every man you see is your brother, your husband, your uncle, your son. It's not that you can't tell the difference between people. You can. But it's that feeling that you have. And a lot of the complaints against near-death experiencers is they're always flirting with somebody. No, they're not flirting. They're just being open and friendly. But it's misinterpreted by the family.
They're radiating unconditional love.
It can blow circuits. And that's the truth. It can be a challenge. There are clearly stages to handling the after effects. The first 3 years are the hardest because those first 3 years, you feel like you're on top of the roof yelling to everybody, God is, death isn't. And everybody else thinks you're a lunatic. So it's really kind of tough to control yourself in those first 3 years. And then it finally occurs to you, you're living in this world with other people and you kind of need to tone things down a little bit. And that lasts for about 4 years. So for the average adult, it takes about 7 to 10 years to integrate the experience. For the average child, it takes 20 to 40 years. That's because a child does not integrate, they compensate. Just a few months ago, I had a man, a cop. Of course, that's how he found my phone number. He's a good cop. And he was a cop on the beat in New York City. He's in his late 40s. And he found my book, The Forever Angels, read it. And he was crying on the phone. Here we've got a grown man and he's crying and crying on the phone. He said, for the first time, I can now understand myself. He had a near-death experience when he was 2. And of course, it changed his brain, changed his mind, changed his way of functioning in the world. And so it was really rough on him to become a police officer. I know exactly because I was raised in a police station. Yeah. So I know what he went through. But he was crying on the phone. That's really a heart stopper for me because I'm there, oh, gee, I finally helped somebody. Well, not finally, but it really moved me that I could help him to that degree.
Wonderful. Well, my last question for you, if it's possible to sum up from all your research of near-death experiences and your own experiences, What do they have to tell us about the purpose of life? Why are we here?
How meaningful it is. How meaningful it is. We come here to learn. We come here to express. We come here to feel and to think and to laugh and to cry. We come here to experience life. And in experiencing life, we learn. Doesn't matter if it's good, bad, or indifferent, we learn. And that seems to be paramount. That seems to be the most important thing, is what did you learn? Even if it's a child that maybe lives a year or a couple of months and dies, maybe that child didn't learn much, but I'll bet the parents did, and the doctors and the nurses. There is no birth of consciousness without darkness. Nothing can grow without darkness. We need darkness to sprout, to grow, to get our muscles, to stand tall, to take anything in. It's the light that validates that darkness, that learning, that growing, and what we learn. The light validates that. But we need the darkness to learn. We are co-creators with the Creator. This is what we glean and learn from near-death experiences, spiritual experiences, other transformative experiences. Basically, we all learn the same thing, that we're more than we think we are, and that this life is part of our growing and learning. This life is precious, and this life is never ending.
Well, that is the perfect note to end on. Couldn't get any better than that.